Welcome, everyone, to Ecopsychology Voices, an interview series with some of ecopsychology's luminaries. Hello, my name is Carol Koziel, and I'm the founder of the Canadian Ecopsychology Network, the sponsor of the series. Today, Linda Buzzell will interview Susan Griffin. Linda is adjunct faculty at Pacifica Graduate Institute, co-editor of Ecotherapy, Healing with Nature in Mind, and along with me, co-creator of this series. Thank you for your ongoing support, Linda, and the airwaves are yours.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited about this because we're going to be talking with the author of one of my favorite books, which is Woman in Nature, The Roaring Inside Her. And of course, Susan has written many other books. So I'm going to do a little brief introduction and then we'll get started with some discussion. Susan Griffin is a writer whose innovative work probes the deeper causes of the destruction of nature, social injustice, racism, and violence against women and in warfare. She has received many honors, including a Guggenheim Fellowship, a Schumacher Fellowship, an Emmy, and the Fred Cody Award for Lifetime Achievement. Her book, A Chorus of Stones, was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. And she has taught in many places, including the California Institute of Integral Studies, Pacifica Graduate Institute, the Wright Institute, and the University of California. So welcome, Susan. I am just thrilled that you're here. Got so many questions to ask you. So we had people email in questions, and I wanted to start with one that really touched me, and that I thought you would be the perfect person to respond to this. The question was, what do you say to young adults who are terrified about their future?
Well, of course, you can't, you have to meet them where they are. You have to meet them with that terror, because it's very real, and it's very hard to maintain that. I think that's why so many people go into denial. They can't live with that terror, and so they tell themselves, well, it'll, technology will come up with some solution to solve it, and they summon all the delusions and illusions that our civilization has managed to offer us in the process of the destruction of nature. So you have to acknowledge that fear. Hello, excuse me.
Uh-oh.
You have to acknowledge that fear is very real, and that it is. They're responding to something very real, and then after that, I think what you need to do is to say, join with others in your fear. Don't let yourself experience it in an isolated way, because that's too hard. And form a group around that fear, and then find a way to turn that into some sort of action. So you may know the work of Joanna Macy, Despair and Empowerment. It's very powerful because it doesn't deny feelings, but it uses feelings to lead to empowerment. In other words, if you really allow the feeling to live in you full-fledged, eventually, rather than trying to suppress it or delude yourself or buy into all the illusions we're offered, you allow yourself to feel it, and at a certain point you reach a place of empowerment. It's part of, I think, part of nature itself. It's our nature to need to survive. And by the way, human beings are social animals, and we need to be with other human beings. And when we do things, we need to act in concert with others, and we need to share our feelings with others. And so that's how I would answer it.
Well, thank you. I wanted to ask you too about one of the amazing things that I find about your work is that you're connecting so many dots, whether it's in terms of ecofeminism or whether it's about democratic process. it's like you're really looking in a much more holistic way at what's going on. Can you help us understand how does what's going on in politics connect with how we're treating nature, what's going on with women in the Me Too movement? And it just seems like there's so much happening and it's very difficult to put it all together.
Yes, it is all connected. And much of my work has been about forging those connections. There's something strange going on with the screen. It's very disconcerting. Anyway, I'm writing a book right now about how the sexual abuse of women in all its forms, going from catcalls to molestation to, is there any way to get rid of that sound? No, there isn't any. Okay. Going all the way to femicide, that this whole phenomena is a mirror of fascism, that fascism and this phenomena of the sexual abuse of women are connected. And they're connected, by the way, through terror. It's not that people are free of terror. In our social organization, we create terror all the time. We terrify people of color, we terrify women, and men themselves are subjected to terror constantly. They're supposed to be these incredible bulwarks against any danger. There's a wonderful film. I can't remember the name of the director, but he's a marvelous director, and he has a new work out now, Beale Street, based on Baldwin's novel. And but it's the film Moonlight, and it shows this evolution of this very tender, sensitive young man into a kind of street, mobster. And the symbolism is wonderful. He wears gold, a gold sort of artificial set of teeth over his teeth, symbolizing this kind of impermeable strength. And so men are subjected. It's the whole system is based on terror that we live in, and fascism is sort of the extreme outcropping of that, outpouring of that. You have, for instance, Trump's. He's not quite a fascist, but he aligns himself with fascists, and his emphasis on winning is at the base of the whole system. So rather than existing as part of nature in a cooperative manner with nature, collaborators of nature, part of nature, born of nature, we look at ourselves as winning over nature. And that was, of course, very much the philosophy of the settlement of the West in the United States. Because, we've got to conquer nature. And Native Americans were looked at as part of nature, not part of human civilization. And they had to be conquered, if not killed. And by the way, speaking of fascism, Hitler took the American treatment of Native Americans as a model for his genocide. He writes about that in Mein Kampf. So anyway, that's the beginning. To really answer it, I'd have to go on for another hour at least anyway, but that's...
Yeah, wow. Well, thank you. And how do you see ecofeminism coming along in terms of both its contributions to fields like ours, ecopsychology, and also to the larger political discourse? What does ecofeminism have to say, really, to all of us?
Well, feminism makes a connection between the oppression of nature and the oppression of women, which, of course, that's what Woman in Nature is about.
Right.
And that work has been continued by many scholars, and I'm part of a anthology. I have a piece in an anthology that was edited by Janine Canty. I highly recommend Ecofeminism. I can't remember the whole title, but it's Ecofeminism is in the title. And in that book, this ecofeminist struggle is tied to the struggle of many indigenous people who are oppressed, because many of traditional, not all, but many traditional philosophies, cosmologies of indigenous people looked at nature as part of us, didn't make that separation between human beings and nature. But that separation is very old in Western thought, but we also have strands within Western thought that do connect to nature. You look at St. Francis and Clare of Assisi, that they both tied human experience with the experience of nature, and revered nature. So we have that in our tradition. It just hasn't been the dominant. And there's a reason why it hasn't been dominant. And that is because we have let those who are willing to be the most rapacious, the most brutal, the best warriors to win, to own everything. And that needs to change. If we are going to face our problems with nature, that needs to shift, that whole philosophy, that whole cosmology, and the social order that has resulted from that. And I think that's beginning to happen. If you look, you can't look at a photograph of the new House of Representatives of the United States without weeping in joy for what's happening in this country.
Can you say more about how democracy can be part of the solution? I think many people started to give up hope that democracy was somehow defunct and we had to turn to something else.
And there isn't anything else, as far as I know, besides except monarchy or tyranny. I mean, democracy is giving power to the people to make decisions about our lives, and we do it as a social body. I think it's perhaps we need to explore additional, not instead of, but added to systems of democracy. The whole idea of sitting in council and letting everybody say their piece and spending a long, long period until we come to a place of really deep agreement. I'd love to see councils between some of the Trump supporters and the rest of us. There's all this talk about the 30% Trump's base,
Right.
30%, I imagine of that 30%, maybe there's something like 5% of them that are really diehard white supremacists.
Right.
And so we're talking about maybe, 25%. And the diehard white supremacists, we do have to try to reach them too. And people who are in that position have changed. And there have been wonderful stories written about those people, and that can happen. But I think, what can we get into dialogue with that 25% or 20%, whatever percentage it is? I think we can. I think a lot of the motivation, to go back to that first question, is terror and fear. They hear about something like global warming and their response is, no, this is not true. That's a human response. No, I'm not going to accept that. I'm not going to let that in. And we need to find ways to help people through that process of understanding the consequences of climate chaos right now.
Right.
That's one thing we need to do, and democratic forms can help that along with town meetings. And deep discussions that include emotions, that don't exclude emotions, but that allow for emotions to be expressed. And because they will be expressed, they'll just be expressed unconsciously through an irrational political position. So if you have democratic discussions that include feelings just in and of themselves, that frees up the space for a more rational and logical exchange of facts and comprehension. And so that's my response to democracy. I love democracy myself.
And what about the Green New Deal? Does that feel like something that
Well, I think it's great.
We can get excited about.
Yeah, I think it's a terrific idea. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's been there. It's been there in the wings for quite a while now. It's not. It's not. New Deal, of course, is an old term that FDR and Eleanor Roosevelt came up with, but it is. And I love calling it the Green New Deal because it's very much like the New Deal, which puts together the needs of working people with the needs of the environment rather than making them opposed to each other. And of course, that's very realistic. That's the truth. That's the way it really is. You know, they are the same, but the people who make a lot of money off of the way things are now want to set up working people in opposition to nature, and they do their best to frame it that way. We used to have a far more radical working class because of unions, and unions educated people, made available to people books and discussions, and now it would be films and podcasts and every other form, to let people know, what was actually, help people understand what was actually going on. And in that period, working people tended to vote and act and often protest for their own benefit. Now they often, they don't understand that Trump represents the interests of the 1%, or sometimes the 0.001%, really. He represents the interests of billionaires, not working people. But over the last, I would say at least 20 years, the Republicans have been trying to advertise themselves as representing the working person. They say working man, so then you see their sexism. But they represent, they claim they represent working people, and they don't. All the way from healthcare to minimum wage to now the government shutdown. They don't have a genuine caring for working people. So it's interesting that they recognize how people really feel at base. They understand that. They understand that the great majority of Americans want there to be fairness in the workplace, fairness in wages, the economy to favor working people. And so they advertise that they do that. But in fact, that's a lie. And we have to do a lot to directly address that lie, directly point out what their policies are doing to harm working people. That is not being pointed out enough yet. And the environmental movement has to do that too, because those same forces try to pit working people against the environment. And nothing could be further from the truth in terms of actual working people's interest. In fact, as I'm sure you know, environmental problems where they cause human disease and illness and loss of property and affect the lower half, which would be the vast majority of people, far more than anybody who has wealth.
It's true. Today is actually the 1-year anniversary of the death of 27 people here in Santa Barbara from the mud flows.
Yes.
And I think it was actually interesting, and that was, of course, after the wildfires that we had. Yeah. But it was an interesting thing for me. It's like it doesn't only affect the working class. It actually affected Montecito, which is one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in our entire country. And it was actually, I think, really, it was horrible and sad. But at the same time, it's like, I think for me, it reinforced the idea that this is affecting everyone, that no one is going to be on some little island where they're not going to be affected. And I'm hoping that that's part of what we sadly learned last year.
Well, it's one of the illusions, and it's very interesting because we had fires up here, as you know.
Yes, horrible ones. Yeah.
The Paradise, the place that Trump called, the Paradise fire was horrible. And the air quality, even in Berkeley, was such that you couldn't go outdoors, and some of it came indoors, and all of us were coughing and feeling ill from it. And so
Right.
it goes on a far more subtle level daily if we don't protect our air quality. And
Right.
and it doesn't matter, how much money you have, you're going to be affected, and so are your children and grandchildren. So that's something else we need to make clear to people. I think it is happening now. I mean, when I wrote Woman in Nature, the connection was not being made between human health and the environment. And that is because I think even the environmental movement was somewhat affected unconsciously by this divide we have between matter and spirit and human life and nature. We don't think of ourselves as nature.
Right.
And that's one of the fundamental things we need to change. We need to understand that nature is not outside us, it's inside us, around us. It is us. That's a seismic, cosmic shift. It is not only mental, it is psychological. It's huge, and it's spiritual. And I think the spiritual aspect of it is very important. You don't have to believe in God as such. Somebody's pushing all the buttons there like the Wizard of Oz. I don't believe in God like that, but I am very spiritual. And I think that there's a dimension of our existence that we don't fully understand because we're particles. We don't understand the whole, but we do know there is a whole, and we can sense and feel the whole. And I think we need to develop that. Everybody has those feelings because they're the truth. And we sense it, that we're part of something larger, and we want to be part of something larger, but in fact we are. It's just that our culture doesn't mirror that. And more, I think we need to create forms that mirror that wholeness, that participation.
Yeah. When I was reading your biography, I read that you have some roots in Canada in your family. Is
Yes.
that right?
Yes, my father was born on Grand Manon, which is an island off New Brunswick.
Yes.
And his family originally, many generations ago, had been American, and they were Tories. So during the American Revolution, they had to flee. And on the other side, on my mother's side of the family, there's an American general.
You got both sides of it.
Nathaniel Green. I don't know who it was, but it might have been Nathaniel Green. Anyway, yeah.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Well, I've got a lot more questions here, but I want to find out what everybody else would like to know from you. So does anybody have a question that you want to ask Susan? Just kind of raise your hand so Carol can see you.